So why am I here? Why am I standing at the Metro tracks in Arlington, Virginia, watching the blue line go by, then the yellow line go by, then the blue line go by again, thinking to myself, which one should I jump in front of? Which one should I just jump in front of to end everything? But let me give you a little history first. I like to ask the question, why am I here all the time? It was May of 1993, and I was assigned to the Pentagon to do computer security. And to anyone who's a second lieutenant, first thing you do when you get assigned to the Pentagon is find a way out. So I actually volunteered to play tuba for the Air Force Band. I did not get that job. And that sounds like a joke. It's not a joke. And it might have been trombone. All I remember is it's an instrument I needed to learn. And I also volunteered for Thule, Greenland, and couldn't get that. And of all the options I had when I was stationed at the Pentagon, none of them were very good, but one was computer security. So I said, why not? I'll give that one a shot. And the reason I'm telling you the story is to give you a little perspective. I'm in front of you today, yet I've done many things in my life to actually not be here today. It's kind of interesting how that happens. My undergraduate was in computer science, but I always wanted to be a regular cop doing forensics. So I went back to school, got a master's in forensic science, wanted to be a real blood and guts guy. Worked at the medical examiner's office for 9 months in DC. Guess what happened when I started doing cases as an agent? Well, every time a computer was seized, I ended up going through a computer. So I ended up doing computer forensics rather than just regular forensics. And I always like having a picture of John Belushi because that's how I look almost every day from about 9 in the morning till noon. But that's how I got here. And why are you here? I think it's just to sharpen our swords a little bit and discuss some of the evolution of incident response, where it's going. I just wanted to put up the miles that I flew last year. It's good to be back in Cleveland. So I came up with a lot of different challenges. One of the things I noticed as I responded to incidents over the last 10 years or so is that I see the same types of problems emerging at most corporations, the same trends. So I wanted to address some of those same challenges that we've seen here today. The criteria that I've got and all the challenges that I list are based on my experiences. I didn't go look at the SANS top 20 vulnerabilities. It's just based on my experience, what I went through, and I wanted to put some of those numbers up here and some of the case types. If I was doing the presentation in 2002 and someone said, well, hey, what are the trends out there? What are the incidents you're seeing? I would have said it's IIS web servers being hacked, and it's some Eastern European folks breaking in for credit card numbers or valid credentials to fraudulently buy something, or to maybe manipulate the web page itself or manipulate the ASP pages to actually fraudulently purchase things. Credit card fraud was a predominant theme back in 2000 through 2002. 2003 brought a whole new wave of incidents for me anyway. And what they were what I'd call propagating or self-propagating intrusions. They were very frustrating to deal with because it gave people the opportunity to unleash something into the wild, and then next thing you know, they have 150 back doors at some major organization. I'll talk a little bit about that. Most of it because of the tool PS Exec, publicly available, written by Mark Razinovich. And if anybody has admin credentials and they can connect to port 139, well, that worm can propagate. I wouldn't call it a worm, though, because it was an actual shell, a computer intrusion, and antivirus really couldn't prevent it. 2004, I've seen no trends other than one. The thing that we're responding to so far this year has been just better sophistication. I don't know if the people behind it are more sophisticated, but I certainly know the tools are more sophisticated. And I'll have a few examples when I talk about the challenges. We're looking at things that aren't loadable kernel modules. They're devices that actually just overwrite dev KMM. Things like the Suckit on Linux, the Suckit rootkit. We've seen non-publicly available versions of that in the wild already that are extremely difficult to respond to. But based on all these things that I've responded to, we came up with a bunch of different challenges. And I'm going to sprinkle into the challenges case studies, real cases, real companies, real people, how they responded, and some of the challenges that we had during those. And I'm going to end with talking about some emerging trends. I'm also going to begin, when I originally wrote this presentation, I said, wow, I got an hour and 45 minutes. That's great. I can get everything I want to get across. Then I looked at the schedule, and it's an hour and 15. So I put my conclusions up front to make sure I got to them. The Cliff Notes version. All right, incident response is definitely not static. In fact, right now there's more change than I've ever seen. For example, if there was a hack in 1988, I did the exact same response in 2002. Trusted toolkits, showing up with your CD, or back then it was a floppy disk, running your trusted toolkits on the machine, sending your stuff across the network or saving it to some media, looking at it. Nothing really changed. Using TCP dump to capture traffic still. I'm still doing that. But we didn't have any evolution of the tools we used from the beginning of security incidents till just about now. We're seeing a lot of neat tools emerge. There's definitely an increase in the complexity of the attacks, no question about it. In 1997, when NARC came out, there was a loadable kernel module that was just fantastic, made tripwire virtually useless, really hid processes on machines. Everybody went, wow, that's real difficult to respond to. The stuff that's out right now, worse, way worse. I'm not even sure what the best way to respond to some of the emerging rootkits is, other than just don't get hacked in the first place. Incident response methodologies have to change to address these, and when I start going through the challenges, I'm going to have a lot more specifics. There's definitely a need for pre-incident preparation. The bottom line is the cost of sustaining your business requires you to do some pre-incident preparation. We'll talk a little bit about that. Here's what I say about the sophistication of the tools. There's so many publicly available and free ways for people to obfuscate what they're doing. I almost feel like stepping out on a limb right now and saying this: reverse engineering of the hacker tools will be almost impossible in several years, if it isn't already on some of the tools we looked at. Everybody here will say, hey, IDA Pro is great. We've already encountered tools where we can't disassemble them. So it protects copyrights. It also protects the purpose of an attacker's code. And then this slide right here is the bread and butter. I can't see it, but I'll explain it to you. Data collection and data interpretation. To me, every single investigation I ever do is two phases. You have data collection, you grab all the stuff, and then data interpretation, you got to go through it, and you got to whittle it down numerous iterations so you get to what I call the relevant information, the information that helps you make the right conclusions, implement the right countermeasures, or if you can't conclude anything, at least come up with a few opinions, right? And number one evolution I'm seeing in incident response is tools that speed up the accuracy and the efficiency and the timeliness of your data collection and speed up and make it more effective for you to do data interpretation. Bottom line, that's the evolution and that's the trend. I'll talk about some specific tools, but mostly I want to convey ideology behind it. So this slide, the whole idea is to compress the moment you've done data collection to the moment you've got the relevant data you need for whatever type of case you're working on, whether it be a computer intrusion, whether it be unacceptable use, whether it be electronic evidence discovery. The goal is always the same. You got data from 3 or 4 different sources, meaning network-based data, host-based data, whether it's live data or forensic duplications. Then you have even interview data, other types of information that you can collect via interviews of individuals. And you just need to keep compressing that until you get to the relevant information. That's it, the cliff notes, right? That's everything I'm really going to talk about, but I'm just going to have more specifics as I go through this. The challenges to incident response are listed next, and I don't remember how many I came up with. There's like 17 or 18. Some of them are exceptionally similar, and what I did is I kind of tied them into what I call the phases of incident response. First phase, arguably, is the last phase, because I don't see too many firms doing pre-incident preparation until they've suffered some horrendous act that makes them realize, hey, we now need the funding to create an IR mechanism. But pre-incident preparation, some people have right at the front. And the number one thing I see is a lot of organizations can't even define incident response. If you go to the FISMA guidelines, there's incident response is such and such. There's a lot of firms that say incident response is there's an IDS alert and the computer nerds respond to that. But then there's other firms that actually respond with, there's inappropriate use on our systems, we have to do an internal investigation, we've got somebody doing harassing email, and it's the IR team or the incident response team that will respond to that. So we have some firms that define incident response very narrowly. I tend to have a very broad definition. I define it very simply as incident response is responding to anything unlawful, unacceptable, or unauthorized on a computer system. And it may not even be, that may even be too narrow. But most organizations define it differently, and they define it based on old politics. If you go to a firm, pretty much any firm right now, you'll see computer security's been, what, about an 8-year-old branch in the firm? You have the network ops guys, they've been around for 30 years with a 30-year budget and a whole bunch of political pull. And then all of a sudden, hey, now we have chief information security officer, small budget, a few guys. Well, who does the incident response there? Who controls how that firm's going to respond? And people are coming up with all kinds of CERT teams that just do nothing but IDS monitoring, to the other side of the spectrum, CERT teams that even investigate fraud at banks. So defining incident response at your organization is going to be your first step if you ever have to do an IR program development. No question about it. 2 was obtaining high-level buy-in. If you don't have in the military, you have no problem. You have the mission to do incident response, and you have to protect America's networks and our livelihood, save lives, all that. What do you do in corporate America, though? You want an incident response team, you see a business case for it. How do you articulate it so the upper-level management gives you buy-in? And I always come up with a couple of ideas, but the number one thing is you either have people that feel compelled to have an incident response team based on the standards, regulations, legislature, or just industry best practices, and they want to keep up with the Joneses, or they make a business case saying, hey, we rely on e-commerce for our survival, it's our bread and butter, should this stuff go down, we lose $1 million an hour. And then they'll know that for sustaining a business, we need to have an IR plan. But that's basically how you're going to have to articulate this. You have to get higher level buy-in by researching the standards, the legislation, the regulations, and you'll hear all kinds of buzzwords. People say Sarbanes-Oxley, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, and all these things that tangentially are related to computer security or directly related, and they can help you get the budget that you need to develop your incident response capabilities. But I've developed IR programs for some of the financial services and some brick and mortar firms, and the reason I've done that ordinarily is they've been feeling compelled based on some kind of industry standard. 3, performing asset classification. I always believe you can't do proper incident response unless you know what matters at your organization, period. And that means what is operationally important, what's your business, what are the information assets that contribute most to your business, and if you don't identify those, well then how do you do incident response? Because I think your incident response needs to directly, you need to outline the assets that matter, the threats to those assets, or at least the perceived threats to those assets, and then should any of those threats become a reality, your plan immediately quashes those threats as fast as possible, implements the right countermeasures. So that's the boring macro stuff, but I think that those are real challenges that every firm has. Not only that, guess what? You get an IR program today, you get the IR slots today, what do you have to do in 3 years? Make the same pitch to different management that you need to maintain an incident response program. One of the frustrating things, and I always explain this, when it comes to computer security or even incident response, I use the following analogy. If 15 people are protecting King Sven of Canada, and he didn't get killed for 10 years, what do? You have 10 people protect King Sven of Canada, but then he gets murdered. What was the right number, right? 10, 11, 12, 13, who knows? Same thing with incident response. It's very difficult to develop the metrics that give you the business case. We'll talk later about the metrics problem. Definitions vary. I just put up here all the different times I've responded, and I've called it incident response. I think anytime I'm slurping data off of a computer system and reviewing it to solve a problem, that's incident response. Anytime I do a live data collection or a forensic duplication, my belief is that the firm that does that, once you start collecting data, you need a case number and you've got a metric and you put it in a database somewhere so that you can communicate that to higher level management later on. The solution slide. I just breeze right through those. Detection of incidents. The interesting thing here is that my belief, especially back in 1995 and 1996, where most incidents weren't. You'd be like, hey, the SIPRNet's been hacked. And then you really look into it and the SIPRNet wasn't hacked. There's somebody using an IP address space from the NIPRNet and happened to use it on SIPRNet and people panicked. But I think right now that percentage has actually gone up. As the end users get more and more educated, I think we're seeing an escalation in the percentage of accurate leads where somebody says, I think I've got a computer security problem. They push themselves away from their machine and people respond and there really is a computer security incident. But the challenge here is what's the right bar? And it's based on your technology that you have deployed and the people you have deployed, really, the people that can do it, your own capabilities. And then ensuring that there's a timely, easy method to communicate that there's been an incident to the experts. I like this slide here. I mean, the number one thing, and when you're developing an incident response plan or when you have a challenge in incident response, there's always a fork in the road where something could be a software glitch, could be a false alarm, or it could be a security incident. And I think one of the number one things you can do is at that fork, have the experts involved to make the right decision. Most firms really only have a small percentage of folks that have done a lot of incident response and can quickly diagnose any issues and say, yeah, that's a computer security incident and we need to respond appropriately, do some triaging and assemble our incident response team. But what I have here on the left is you're seeing all the different sources of the detection mechanism, all the different ways somebody can trigger your incident response and say, hey, we've got issues. You'll see external would be somebody's hacked your site and then they go public with it. Someone's hacked your site and they send you an extortion email. IDS systems, intrusion detection system alerts, end users, help desk folks. And I always like to ask the question, let's just see a show of hands. Anybody want to guess how many times IDS was the trigger mechanism for me to jump on a plane and fly out and respond? Anybody think it was more than 40 times? Some do, good. Not including my Air Force career, I've never responded due to an IDS alert. So I've probably, yeah, it's a fact. I don't know what that means. I'm not pro or anti-IDS, but I can tell you this. I never got a phone call from a financial service. We have an IDS alert, and can you get here and help us respond to this incident? Number one for me is either end users / system administrators or external. And the external would be a downstream victim saying, hey, I'm getting hacked by, for example, Exxon.com or somebody like that, and then Exxon now knows, hey, maybe we had an intrusion, whatever it might be, or it's the extortion email. And there's been quite a few extortion emails in the last 5 years. That's kind of going down as well. Security staff as well, they've done some detection, but interesting thing about system administrators is just in general, when they detect something, they've also done about 55 investigative steps, of which they've documented none, of which they can tell you 35. That's ordinarily the handoff I get from system administrators. Semi-chronological, but not quite. That's a reality. End users, when they detect it, they usually just hand it over to the security folks. I have so many examples there, but I'll give you this one. This is pretty amazing to me. This is a case I was involved in 2000, in 2001. There's a bunch of folks at Lucent Technologies that really picked up on something. There was two folks putting proprietary equipment into a gym bag. And if you're sitting at your desk and you turn around and you see two folks putting stuff in a gym bag, you may not think, hey, this is an information security problem. You may think these folks are just going home to work overtime. Well, it actually did trigger the IR mechanism, and the folks at Lucent Technologies did network monitoring, they did covert duplications of drives, and did a lot of great things in response to two foreign nationals, Kaiju and Hai Lin, and a couple other folks who allegedly were taking source code from Lucent on a project that had about $584 million in revenue in the year 2000. But I just use that as one of the most odd detection mechanisms. Gym bags being stuffed with stuff led to monitoring of traffic and email. Kind of neat. There's a whole bunch of examples there, but I just can't wait to talk about initial response and the issues there. One of the biggest things that happens, and every firm needs to be able to concentrate on this issue, is minimizing the moment that you detect a possible incident to the moment of confirmation. And I've been amazed at how long this has happened. For example, I worked at a bank in 2001 where I threw into a system on something where they got an extortion email on May 3rd of 2001. That extortion email outlined, we have hacked your site, and attached is a database, and attached really was a database. The attached database was encrypted with the CEO's password. Well, here's how this bank responded. Realized that the person who got the extortion email was the poor Stuckey, who was the WHOIS point of contact. 26-year-old kid, he gets this email and goes, whoa, this is a problem. He didn't escalate it right away. What he decided to do is he went to the domain controller. He ran PW dump by Todd Sabin, dumped all the passwords. He used LoftTrack, cracked them all, and after about a week, which is a world record for a CEO password, I mean, kudos to the CEO, they cracked the password, and then he verified, yeah, this attachment was PK-zip encrypted with the CEO's password, and then the contents of it were 17,000 plain text records of the bank's clients. And they had a lot more clients than that. But that was May 3rd when the email arrived, and May 29th was when the boss found out, meaning the first boss. So that's 26 days from the moment there could have been an incident to the moment it's been escalated. That may be an appropriate time frame for you at your firm. For a lot of other people, they'd like to know a little sooner. Accurately and rapidly determining the scope or extent of an incident is a difficult thing to do, and that's the number one thing. Every time I fly in and it's kind of like a computer intrusion, the first thing I do is start doing several things in parallel, actually. Putting eyes on the network, meaning get network monitoring going as best as you can. The only time I don't do that is when I'm feeling lazy. There's really no good excuse not to. So I always get network monitoring going, usually just using TCP dump or T-Ethereal, and creating 2 gig files on some Linux box somewhere, a free BSD box somewhere. Second thing I start doing is generating host-based indicators of the compromise as fast as possible, because guess what I have to do? Immediately determine Where are those indicators on this network? If there's 2,000 compromised machines, I need to somehow get information off all 2,000 and immediately say, hey, 75 of these have been compromised, and here's the host-based indicators. So it's very difficult to do that. A lot of firms quit after a few days, too. They have that run out of steam effect. And right now, with the self-propagating intrusions, it's real difficult because anybody who's using Tivoli or SMS, I can't say they're bad products or fantastic, but they do have one possible security flaw, and it's that they require the admin credentials to be the same on almost every single box. So what happens is these tools will break that admin credential, and guess what happens at a firm? If there's a global domain account that's admin, and these guys break it, they're going to basically compromise every single system. And that becomes relatively obvious when you start determining the extent of compromise, and it's every box. Have fun with the remediation plan. Determine the entities that need to be involved. I always believe, and it's different at every firm, that different people need to be involved in different types of cases. HR is involved when you have an insider. Legal counsel may always be involved. It depends. You may have public affairs involved if you think there's going to be negative exposure or imminent possibility of that. But do you really automatically have to have HR involved every single time? Will they bog down the process? Will they stop the decision-making process? You have to figure that out at your firms. And one of the things that becomes very difficult for me is if I get called or hired to help a company respond, and I show up and there's 100 people in the room. I have no idea who to listen to. I have no idea who I can assign what to, and who's really augmenting the staff or my capabilities with what skill sets. But it becomes real difficult if you have a computer intrusion and you respond. It's very technical. It's high-level tools. It's on all Unix systems, and there's 5 HR people in the room, unless they also respond to intrusions. And the case study I have here on the moment of detection to the moment of confirmation, this is kind of a neat little case we worked on. There's a bank that a woman lost $50,000 in a transfer, and anybody want to guess what country got the $50,000? Russia. If anybody says Russia, you're the winner. I mean, yes. Somebody from Russia connects, has valid credentials, they get $50,000 from this woman. Now here is the problem. Where's the compromise? Was the bank hacked and they lost all the credentials, or was the woman hacked? Well, you know, the bank wants us to look at the woman's machine. The woman wants us to, hey, look at the bank. They've got to be the issue. Well, you're looking at the picture of the evil computer. It was actually the woman that was hacked and had her credentials compromised, and I just want to go through this. For the data collection, we just did a forensic duplication of the box. It was kind of nice because we got to go to an island in the Caribbean to do this. For those who care, very common, it's a Dell laptop. No, it was a Dell desktop, so it had the Dell partition at the beginning and then just regular NTFS. Real quickly, we were looking at the drive, and the individual that did this was a guy named Curtis Rose, and he'll tell you, I solved the case in 4 minutes. I'll say 5. But it took him 55 minutes to, for some reason, he had a faulty hard drive on his forensic workstation at the time. So when he was restoring the in-case evidence file, it took like 50 minutes. And as soon as the in-case evidence file finally opened up, he has a tendency to just sit back and just kind of click through directories saying, you know, what's the shape of the drive here, what's on it. And he sees a file called sdsini.ini. And he goes, why is there an ini.ini file? That doesn't make sense. So the very first file he opened 4 minutes after he restored the image happened to be a keystroke logging file. So, and then he did his dance around the office. I solved it. But he didn't solve it. That was just the tip of the iceberg. But what it gave us was a great creation time. And I know most of you in this room know there's, in Windows, there's 3 functional times that I usually care about. There's creation time, last written time, and last access time. And hey, they're right on the slide too. But Curtis noticed the time date stamps on the creation of the keystroke capture and immediately just sorted on the time date stamps and started reviewing, and he found the file called IE update that was packed with this FSG, fast and small good portable executable packer, and people do that all the time just so that they can get by antivirus. You can pack these things any way you want. You can encrypt them, and the beginning part of the code is going to decrypt the rest of the executable. We used Soft Ice to take a look at what this did, and it turned out to be an installation program for a bunch of different things. Actually, it wasn't quite a known antivirus. I mean, antivirus didn't pick it up. It wasn't a known problem. What we did at that point is we noticed that IE update at a creation time, well, I know it's 1 second after this. a compiled HTML file was found on the woman's system. So we made the assumption, and there's a lot more evidence that proved this that I left out, such as, believe it or not, we went to the Dr. Watson logs and a user dump file to see what happened, but it was an IE vulnerability, and we kind of figured out which one. But somebody went to a website, there's a vulnerability in Internet Explorer, and it allowed this code to be arbitrarily placed on our system. And it did a lot of bad things. And Morse's payload was delivered on April 28th of this year, but it was 2 days before the actual backdoor was installed and everything else, because the person had to reboot the system for it to take place. And we've actually seen quite a bit of that. If you ever see shutdown on a system or you see a machine randomly reboot, we've seen a lot of intrusions where somebody breaks in and to get their service to run appropriately for some reason, they'll reboot the system so that the registry changes take place, system pops up. It's just not normal for machines to topple over, bottom line. So, well, it depends, right? Well, I can tell you this. I was at a meeting with a bunch of senior execs at a bank. They got an email, an extortion email from a guy in Russia, and with a straight face, one of the execs asked me, were we hacked? And I said, you have an email from Russia with all your clients' data on it? Yes, I think so. Third grade detective work, right? But literally, people don't always understand it. If a machine constantly is rebooting, some people don't consider that an indicator. For whatever reason. But more so now, I think, than ever before, when a machine reboots, you've been compromised. And that's across the board. Especially with the dev KMEM overflows on Linux. If a Linux machine just crashes on you, you may want to take a look at it before you boot it back up. Use a Knoppix boot CD, go through the file system with the trusted media, not the OS that's on it, because we've seen a lot of dev KMEM tools like Socket crash systems. Fun stuff. All right, just time, date, stamp analysis. We found a file that's known to be part of the Tofker Trojan, but I want to get to the neat stuff. A couple minutes later, we see the WAN UPD.exe was created. The interesting thing about WAN UPD.exe, it was XOR encrypted, and when we used a decompiler, you could see it called the XOR decryption functions. Curtis actually decrypted it manually anyway, because he likes doing those sort of things with xcalc. But this is the file that triggered the whole response. Seeing this sds.ini.ini and noticing it was plain text keystroke captures was a big clue that something wrong had happened. But what made it interesting, remember the whole goal here was the woman's credentials for the bank compromised? And we had determined they were because of the position of this INI file. It was actually in the C/Windows directory, and that just happens to be a system directory. So, long story made short, when you have the system restores on your laptops, guess what it backs up? .ini files, .sys files, some .cad files in this directory. So the attacker unwittingly backed up his own keystroke logger for the months that it was installed. And that gave us perfect damage assessment. So the thing was, we had to go to the system restore point and mount it. For those of you that have ever tried to do this, by the way, on your active volume, it's not easy to do for some reason. We had to do, actually, and in case you can't do it, we had to copy it over to a live NTFS volume, and then it decompressed it automatically. We spent like 2 days randomly trying to decompress it, writing code. Why? All you have to do is copy it to a live file system. It'll decompress automatically, and you can go through the restore points. And it was kind of nice, because once we did that, we found 25 versions of that keystroke capture, and without a doubt, that's how the credentials had been compromised. Now, what did this file do? Well, we looked at some more of the code, and these ini.ini files, the keystroke capture files, were sent to Russia periodically. They would automatically be deleted right after they got sent. The reason we found one, well, it hadn't been sent yet, and it had been collecting data for the last couple of days. We had over 400 pages of content, including very personal keystrokes and things like that. I've talked to numerous people. This type of attack is pretty widespread right now. In fact, most people don't even detect it. If somebody didn't use their bank account and transfer $50,000, who would have known that our email had been read and a bunch of other things? So, and then we looked at the restore points, which most forensic examiners are still not in the practice of doing. Next challenge, and remember, that was an example for confirmation of an incident. It really saved everybody a lot of grief and heartache finding out that was the initial point of entry or compromise, was that single Dell system belonging to the woman. Otherwise, we would have had a major response at a bank trying to figure out, hey, which system here may have been compromised with these credentials. And the problem is, ordinarily, if you see a bank account being used fraudulently, compromise occurred 6 months prior. 5 months prior, and it takes that long before they start using the accounts or the credentials. Most I've seen is 6 months. Usually it's about 3 months. You have folks that'll hack in, get the credentials, then they hand it over to the folks that'll use them, and that handoff can take a couple months. Formulating response strategy, I don't want to spend a lot of time here because it's common sense, but it actually can save you a lot of grief. Before you ever have your worst fears become a reality in the computer security field, why not have the folks that need to be involved in an incident response get together, sit at the table, and determine who has the control of the incident and how you'd respond in the first place? It'd save a lot of time. Most of the mistakes that I've seen, I used to say when I responded to most incidents, it was technical mistakes would lead the top. People trampling on evidence, altering time date stamps, not having a methodology in place. But right now, I think the number one mistake I see is just the failure to make rapid decisions. People get together and they sit there, and every second that goes by, the compromise could be expanding rapidly, or they'll have a knee-jerk response to something because they weren't prepared, or they don't even assemble the right people. But you can iron all that out ahead of time. I can tell you right now, you name the company you're in, and I could say, well, here, right away, the pharmaceuticals, all of them are worried about the same 5 things. Banks are worried about the same 4 things. They all need to go through that drill. If we lose credit card numbers, how are we going to respond? If we lose client data but not credit card numbers, how do we respond? If we lose the secret formula to Campbell's soup, how do we respond? So all that needs to be figured out ahead of time. The big challenges, and the ones I'm going to spend the most time on, are right here. Data collection, data analysis, the actual investigation of things. Data collection has always taken an exceptionally long time, and like I started out my presentation, and I think most people would agree, in 1988, Unix system gets hacked. You're responding with trusted toolkits on the hacked system, sending the data across the network or maybe to another piece of media so that you can review it. No different than today. So we haven't seen much of an evolution there, but we are about to see a lot of tools come out that are capable of capturing live data across the network instantaneously. And you can pre-posture yourself to have a success story doing that. The method to perform forensic duplication is unbelievable. I've gone through numerous electronic evidence discoveries on Wall Street and other places, and it's amazing the operational burden on firms that get SEC subpoenas, sometimes not even with trigger events, and they have to shut down 40 servers. It's unbelievable, and the day where that operational burden needs to be placed on a firm is going to change, or should change by now. Tools exist that can do that. And then I say one of the other challenges is the sophistication of the tools being used by attackers. Your live response and your trusted toolkits are useless to some of the rootkits that are out there. And then you heard somebody talk yesterday about, it's even worse now, putting bad code on the EEPROMs. That's fantastic. So then you put a trusted media and you boot off that, and there's bad code on the EEPROM anyway, so you can't trust the whole system. What do you do then? Take the hard drive out of that computer, put it in another computer just to restore it. That's going to be a problem. But just an example, and this is something I responded to a lot in 2003. In May of 2003, I went to 4 sites without going home, and it was almost the exact same type of attack. That self-propagating attack where most likely what happens, guy or a woman takes laptop home, laptop gets hacked at home, they bring it back in, and the intrusion was the following. As soon as they boot up, a server starts scanning port 139, the infamous sprinkler, right? Scanning port 139, trying to brute force the admin account. And as soon as it happens, it uses PSExec, all automated. With PSExec and a single command line, once you have credentials, you can connect to a remote machine and upload a tool and run it. That's fantastic for scripts. So they would upload a tool that would then extract itself, and then next thing you know is what? 75 different files on the victim machine, and then they do PSExec one more time, they run a batch script, they call it a batch script, they call it a batch script, and 55 things got ran on your system. And this thing propagated very quickly. It was in the wild, and the person who did it, well, you can figure it out, but most of them were coming out of Eastern Europe. The backdoor that was used is normally IRC, but there's any backdoor. You use the admin telnet server, it doesn't matter. But ordinarily, because everybody uses network address translation, the backdoors are beacons. It's something where the client initiates it, so I call it client-side initiated, right? And that's what we're seeing right now is one of the more frustrating and widespread type of attacks. Here I'm showing you how an incident is detected at a pharmaceutical. I cleansed this. But they caught IRC traffic going out of their network, but it was on port 21, FTP port. They immediately said, hey, that's bad. Good assumption. So the incident was detected right away. Here's how we respond now. This is kind of the current state of the art, but it's evolving. It's you have the trusted toolkit already made for your environment. You have Linux, you have Solaris, you have whatever you need. And in this case, it was Windows systems. And we had a trusted Windows 2000 kit, trusted Windows ME, whatever we needed. And this is the information we got just to determine scope of compromise, gathering that live data. And we went to one system that we knew had been compromised because it was the source IP address for all this traffic. And we went through it very extensively, determining what I called the host-based indicators, the name of the files the attacker installed, the ports that the guy opened, the applications that opened those ports, the current connections if they mattered, the registry entries that would prove that the system had been compromised. And I can show you right here, just this is the directory structure of this particular compromise, and all we had to do is quickly go through their network, determining, hey, where do these files reside? We know that that machine's been compromised, at least by this intruder. Now, the problem becomes when you're responding, you may miss the fact that you'd been hacked by a different guy using different tools. So we tried to do a pretty complete review. Once we got the indicators of attack on that one machine, we immediately just did the live response everywhere. And at this organization, they had a bunch of offsites. So what ended up happening is I came in, I actually used a PowerBook, and I sat down with my Mac on the hostile network. I just felt more secure that way. Threw my Mac down, and I just started CryptCat listeners. And I didn't know what else to do, and this is current state of the art. We responded to almost 200 machines in 2 days, which is great. But we had to get our staff augmented with the client that had had the intrusion. And we had about 15 people come in the room. We gave them trusted toolkits. We said, here's what you're going to do. Bob, you're going to go to site 1. You're going to send information to me on ports 1,000 through whatever, but you're only going to use ports 1,000 to 2,000. John, you go to site 2, you get 2,000 on up. I started 1,000 ports and just sat there, dumb like a cat, waiting for information to come to me while everybody deployed. So it required the client to augment us, which is a fine thing. They know their networks better than we did. We went from machine to machine to machine to machine that was currently on. If it wasn't on, we turned it on, threw the toolkit in, and ran it. But we did all our trusted response, hoping like heck that the trusted toolkit was going to work and that there was no kernel alteration or anything. In Windows, it used to be, I felt like I could trust my live response. That's all changing slowly but surely. But that's a tedious way to do it. And I think technology does exist right now, but more technology, it's going to be less expensive, available, is going to exist for everybody. To be able to sit in one place and maybe have a pre-deployed servlet or pre-deployed server or some kind of technology where you could just say, hey, we believe there's a compromise, here's the indicators, and it's to immediately reach out and grab all the data you need in 5 seconds. It'd be a lot better. And get that into the hands of a centralized CERT team that has the expertise to do it. And no question, in 5 years, most of the military branches and most of the financial services will have technology that implements that. Otherwise, you are going from machine to machine to machine. No good way to be discreet, by the way. If you're a client or you've had an intrusion and you don't want anybody to know about it, and there's 6 guys in suits running around from machine to machine to machine with boot CDs, you can't hide the fact that something bad's happened at that point. And what's worse is the one time I did come up with a cover, I said, I'm semantic antivirus. And someone, whoa, there's viruses here? And so it didn't work. But I had a bunch of Symantec shirts that I passed out to the team. Backfired. Well, we still use them. Forensic duplications as well. I'd said gathering live data takes too long. Forensic duplications, it is amazing that this still happens. The way people respond to electronic evidence discovery today is the same as 1995, and in technology, I think that needs to change dramatically. Long story made short, in electronic evidence, there's 4 phases to the discovery issues. 1, find where the information may be. 2, do a forensic duplication of it. 3, minimize it appropriately based on time, date stamps, keyword searches, whatever you can. Some lawyers don't even want you to minimize it all and use 8 terabytes of data, and they finally realize, oh, that 8 terabytes means a lot. And then 4 is producing responsive documents, whatever that may be. I've done it on DVD, I've done it on CDs, I've done it on hard drives. You can never iron out exactly how you want to do it. There's no standard methodology. There's been some interesting legislature lately that I might expound upon in a second, with some trials like Nicholson versus Medtronics. It's a civil case. There's spoliation issues. And I got to write an opinion for that was pretty interesting in looking at, is there a way to respond to all this electronic evidence discovery without shutting down 55 servers? The answer is there is, and there's going to be more options to you in the future so that when you respond to discovery issues, you don't have to shut down your whole business for several days. But right now, what I'm describing is standard at organizations that have a government subpoena served on them or a civil subpoena served on them. One, you identify the potential sources, the email servers, the backup tapes, whatever it might be that could harbor data that's responsive to the subpoena. And some of these subpoenas, I wish I could throw up some examples, and I probably should have. They're so broad, I can't think of a machine you exclude. The janitor, if he's got a Palm Pilot, you got to tackle him before he goes outside and get his Palm Pilot data. But here's what generally happens. I just put a timesheet. I've got a database with literally thousands of acquisitions that I've done. This is a little bit long, but it's a good example of what we do when we do electronic evidence discovery. We go in, we got to go grab the systems. You have two options, right? You either go from office to office to office with all your forensics equipment, or you set up in an office where you can do it a little more discreet without interruption, and just go get a system, bring it in, disassemble it, do the duplication. But almost every single firm that does this job does it like this. And you're looking at a server, let's say it's an e-commerce server, it's got responsive data on it, shutting it down, retrieving it, bringing it in the room, documenting it for chain of custody, then maintaining it in an evidence database as well, performing a duplication and performing the hash on the duplication, creating a backup. Now you have two copies of it, and then you feel good about handing that drive back, putting it in the system, and then you actually have to do a diagnostic at the end to make sure it still works. Last thing you want to do is get called by a bank, go in, image 100 machines, and then 15 of them won't boot after you leave. They're going to immediately have liability against you and your organization. But we're looking at 3 hours and 24 minutes. This was for a specific job I did in January this year. Everything was an 80 gig hard drive for the most part, and we were doing FireWire acquisitions. Sometimes we used the image masters, the DD, Linux DD copies, which were a little bit faster. And we just didn't, we were with laptops, and weren't super high-powered laptops, so it took a little bit of time. But that's a long time to take a system out of action, especially when you're grabbing laptops from senior executives, because let's face it, every subpoena order is for senior executives that had a lot of influence in the corporation to turn over their email and a bunch of other things. Usually the targeted individuals run the show, and you're taking them out of action for 4 hours. I don't know, when I used to work at the Pentagon, it was actually kind of fun. When the network went down, everyone went home. And it was kind of like that electronic evidence discovery. It's sort of the same thing. People just go, oh my, here they come. Hand over your machines and go home. Next challenge is sophistication of the tools. There are definitely kind of forensic techniques that are getting more sophisticated. And it's interesting. The last 2 months we've responded to a couple of cases. And one of them, I took the details out here, but it was a 0-day exploit. That was frustrating. And the reason we figured that out is because it was built, like most exploits, on older code, older exploit code, but it worked pretty well. But everything the guy did on the system erased itself after he executed it. Every executable was encrypted, and it decrypted itself upon execution. When I say erased, it didn't just, erase itself. It overwrote itself with zeros. I mean, this thing's really gone. It overwrote itself. Fantastic tool. In a way, I'm just like, that's great, but it's also frustrating because anybody that uses it, including a 10-year-old, makes fantastic damage to your systems. It's frustrating. I honestly didn't know how to respond to it other than we were booting up with Knoppix to find the indicators because there's a kernel level attack, and restoring drives from scratch. About a year ago, a guy made an article. He said, well, if you've been compromised, the best thing you can do is just reinstall your whole operating system and start over. And I was like, that is crazy. That's just not right. It's starting to be a little more interesting, like that's a possibility in certain times. And then number 17 is the capability to perform rapid forensics. I absolutely believe this, and I can't come with the right wording for it, but you got to do analysis that gives you the biggest bang for the buck. So you hurry up and get all the data that you need to collect, the live data, the forensic duplications as fast as you can, and that's important to minimize that time frame to confirm attacks or respond to subpoenas, whatever it happens to be. But then you want to interpret it for the right things. And one of the amazing things I've seen about computer forensic analysts is they never really have a plan. Some of these cases are pretty simple, like the one I talked about where a bank, the woman lost $50,000. Well, the extent of our exam should be, how did she lose her credentials? And the minute we find that, we're sort of done, right? But technical guys, they just start looking at everything on the drive and start decompiling tools and figuring out how does this exploit exactly work. And that's neat to have that happen, but you kind of need to get the answer to the clients as fast as possible. I've seen people really deviate because they don't have a written plan when they start looking through hard drives for exactly what they're looking for. I call it elements of proof. What are you looking for? Write it down, stick to it, stay on target, as Biggs Darklighter once said. The case I'd like to talk about here on finding the needle in the haystack quickly is another case Curtis Rose worked at when he was at a company called Cytex, and it was just, he finds things that most forensic examiners don't. I've been to a lot of forensics training, and this one's kind of neat because he found something that everybody could easily have done, but probably less than 3% of us would have gone this extra mile. And the case involves Sami Omar Al-Hussein. He was a Saudi student. He was definitely guilty of being a bad grad student, no matter what, because I got to see his thesis paper, and it was quite, probably half plagiarized and kind of not as good as what a lot of people would write. But anyway, he was accused of material support to terrorism, maintaining websites that gave instructions to bad people, recruited bad people, that sort of thing. So when looking at his machine, you'd want to see, did he manage websites? Was he the webmaster? Did he connect to websites? Did he upload pages, download pages, create pages, that sort of thing. And when they did the analysis, it's kind of neat. I always say data collection, do a forensic duplication. A lot of you may have heard of this case. It was tried in Boise, Idaho, about 2 months ago. Curtis testified for 2 days. Did a great job. Interesting. But what I want to focus on is this one thing he did that I just felt very few people would do. He noticed that there's a smart FTP client on the system that he was reviewing. And one of the things I've always done in forensic review is I create a whole list of here's the 30 technical things I need to do for the 5 non-technical elements I'm trying to prove. And then I keep adding to it as I learn things about the person. And one of the steps I've always said is you look at everything installed on the system, and then you look at everything that's been uninstalled. It may be a clue. Kurt looked at everything in the program files directory, standard, simple, investigative steps. See Smart FTP. And there you see it, program files, Smart FTP. Goes into that, and he also notices there's configuration files that go along with Smart FTP. Makes sense. Who cares though? So there's a Smart FTP client on the system. And this is just one example of about 15 things he did on this machine that was phenomenal. Sees the Smart FTP directory as subdirectories, a cache directory and a data directory. And the odd thing here is this cache directory actually had nothing but deleted directories in it. So the program itself, Smart FTP, when it operates, when you connect to a site, it automatically will create a temporary directory for whatever reason, and then when you disconnect, it erases that directory. But using forensic tools, you can see them all. And this is, in fact, in case being used, showing you all those deleted directories. So when you see a folder with a big red X in it, that means that folder had been marked for deletion, but still traces of it were in the FAT table, or in this case, in the master file table in the NTFS file system. And what you're looking at here is a structure that's interesting. IP address dash user ID dash port number that the person connected to. And there's a whole lot of stuff, so as an investigator, Curtis immediately figured this pattern out. That's called a clue. And he said, okay, website, name, and the port number connected to. And then he created this table, which is nice. It's the IP addresses and everything that's been connected. And it just kind of tidies up what Smart FTP had been used to do in the last couple months. Now realize when you undeleted all those directories, there could have been thousands of other entries. Actually, in this case, there wasn't. Come to think of the master file table does a great job of remembering directories that you delete. Anyway, what he ended up doing then is just taking Smart FTP, installs it on his own system, and then he takes those DAT files, those data files that were on Sammy's machine, and just puts them on his forensic workstation. Why not? Let's run it. Let's see what it looks like. And by placing the suspect files on his forensic workstation, he found out some interesting things. He did a neat little test. He wrote a white paper that's probably available at the SciTech's homepage. It's great. It's something we all know we never do. It's this kind of stuff. And he opened it up, and if you look at Smart FTP right now, that's what Sammy Omar Al-Hussein would have seen had he been on his own machine. Very simple. So you get all the websites in the big block on the left, but look at the right. You have the hashed password. You got something on the right. So what Curtis did is he just said, hey, at the end of that password, I'm going to add my initials. Can't remember what CW Rose or whatever he added, CWR. Then he ran the connect. Obviously, he wasn't on the internet at the time. Just wanted to point that out. He's on a test network, and he runs it. And then he just uses user dump and dumps memory, because you realize FTP is an interclear protocol. The application has to decrypt or decode, if it's not encrypted, just decode the password. And he actually figured out every password this guy used. And this is not the only application he did this with. He did it with a bunch of other ones. And that's a neat little thing a lot of people overlook when they're looking at drives. So I just want to throw that out there. Big bang for the buck. Know what your elements of proof are when you start reviewing a drive, and then go after them tenaciously, writing down the steps that you do. We have seen not a lot of practice on that. Reporting. I like talking about this one as well. Failure to document the steps taken in a timely manner. I've met very few people that document the steps they take when responding to an incident and then also reviewing the contents of a hard drive. And that's why I've always tried to have the practice of, everybody wants the right methodologies for forensics. I can tell you right now, your first step is to determine the right methodology. So we have a methodology that says, write your elements of proof. Second one, how are you going to get those? What are you going to do to get those? So we almost rewrite our checklist on each case that we have, because we have to make it such a case-specific thing. And very few people do that. It's a good practice to make. It keeps you on target, and it automatically, if you look at a drive and you spend 15 days doing it, at the end of 15 days, if you find nothing, you don't want to write a one-page letter, hey, found nothing. You want to write a letter that says, didn't find anything, but here's the investigative steps I did, and you've documented it as you go, and it keeps you on target. You don't want to get distracted when you have 55 computer systems to review, and a client's watching you do it, saying, you have 3 days to help us out here, we're dying. We recently responded to a site that did $10 million in transactions in the last month, and they were only down for 15 minutes during our response, but they'll never have an appreciation for how fast you are, and the only way you can stay on target is to write those steps down. And then inexperienced personnel, because they don't know what steps to write down, period. So you need to have a couple guys that can sit there and say, I'm going to manage this effort and be wear the battle captain hat, and say, these are the 15 things we're going to do. When you're done with those, come back to me. I may have 5 more additional steps based on the findings that we have. And one of the stories I like to tell right here for the reporting is sent an individual to New York in 2002 to respond to a senior exec at a bank who apparently had downloaded a file called rkelly.zip. And I don't know if you remember at that time frame, where Robert Kelly was, I don't know, I think he's still making albums, making millions and on the streets having fun, but he videotaped himself with a 14-year-old. And this file was downloaded, and what was interesting at this firm is they could see in their firewall logs, wrap their firewall logs, hey, this is the IP address that downloaded rkelly.zip, but guess what? Not sure who had it at that time, because it was DHCP. So they knew it was probably one of these 3 different people. So we had to go in at night, look at a couple different drives, quickly preview them just to see if there's an rkelly.zip file. We found it. I believe 3 or 4 days later, I'm reading this 8-page report on this child pornography case. At the end of reading it, I'm not making this up, I had to ask the investigator, did you find child pornography? That was the #1 goal of the whole case. And he just wrote, I found rkelly.zip, he got it via BearShare, and then he spent 5 pages how BearShare works, how he can prove he got it through BearShare. Here's the directory structure, here's the screen captures, but bullet #1 should have been, we found something that appears to be child pornography, so that senior executives didn't learn everything about BearShare, but not even get the actual point they needed. We've developed templates at a lot of organizations. I highly recommend any firm that does incident response that they have the appropriate forms pre-made and handed to the folks that do it so they can keep track of the right things. And then if you do forensic reports, just have a structure in place that fosters I call it the macro to micro writing, executive summary on down through the technical details. But with templates in place, still no guarantee you're going to get all the details, but it's a great start, and I know most firms have those templates. Challenges to resolutions, unbelievable. I mean, I put in Burgundy, I only wanted to talk about phased approach, but I got to talk about another one. In 2001, I responded to an organization that lost $10 million in fraudulent purchases. Someone had valid credentials to their web application, and they kept buying computers, routers, hard drives. They were being shipped to a guy in Kansas or wherever. I always say Kansas because that seems to be where most of them were. And all the folks did in Kansas is reship them to Moscow. Kind of a neat little thing, the remailing, and then things would get sold on the black market. Now this firm lost quite a bit. I think they actually lost $6 or $7 million. There was $10 million in attempted fraudulent buys. $6 million of equipment was out the door and gone. And I sat in the room with 109 people. And you might say, well, you sure it wasn't 110? It was 109 because we had a roster. And the CIO of this organization said, I don't care how long we're off the internet. We've had this happen for 3 years now. It's over. We're going to fix the problem. We're going to do whatever it takes. We're making our stand. And I'll say it was a stand like Custard, because Custer's stand didn't work, and nor did this one. We spent 3 days over the weekend doing a perfect, like literally, it's a 12-page checklist remediation plan. There was one guy with an FTP server doing legacy stuff for like 3 or 4 clients that wouldn't take his FTP server out of DMZ, and I'm convinced that was the problem. Literally within 3 days of this enormous remediation effort, fraudulent purchase happened again. So we either had an insider just mailing the credentials out, or it was this FTP server. But they run out of steam, because guess what happened? They didn't even try after that. I was like, okay, well, that didn't work, and went on. Almost every response I've ever had, you hit it hard days 1 through 4 or 5, and I can honestly say I think we had one where the firm just drove it home the whole way through, and it was very recently. They did a great job working around the clock, sleeping in colo sites, and doing everything right. What I've noticed too, and it's something that shocks people, the number one thing we've seen firms doing in the last 2 years, and it's a recent phenomenon, but I've noticed it, and it started last May. We'd respond to a compromise that was so widespread, and this was at a major ISP, and then later we did it at a hospital, and then right after that we did it at a pharmaceutical, and there was a fourth one, all in May. I don't recall the fourth one, but the remediation steps were identical at all 4 sites. They said, all right, this network, done. We'll get a new router, new firewall, or they already had the equipment, or we actually in one instance made a free BSD machine, dual homed it, just threw it down to do some firewalling for them, and they said, we're going to migrate known good stuff, it's going to come off the network, we're going to rebuild or repatch or do whatever we got to do, and then we're going to stuff it over here. And that's actually been the most common remediation plan we've seen lately, and it seems to make a lot of sense, because the way you can do it is a tiered approach. Because of the run out of steam factor, you identify the machines that are the most important assets, or the most important applications, or the most important operations, or the machines that give the are the ones used by your most important clients. Whatever the criteria is for the stuff that matters, you get that over to the secure network first so that your key applications, key business areas keep working, and then you slowly migrate. And just to manage expectations, I've seen some firms take over 1 year to respond to intrusions because they did the migration approach, and there's always a part of their network that tends to be the Wild West. They never quite respond to it. And if you think about it, once someone breaks into your network, they have 3 options to get in. They either have vulnerable services that are working to break into your network, or they have valid credentials to get in, or they have their back doors. And guess what? All 3 are different remedial techniques. Almost everything we respond to, that's the case. All 3 of those ways are entries into your network. For vulnerable services, you need to have somebody do an assessment, right? They run their Nessus, they run whatever tools they have, and they determine, yeah, you have 12 vulnerable services on these 5 boxes, whatever. Fine, but what do you do with the loss of all valid credentials? You have to somehow, some way, magically change 15 to 50,000 passwords in seconds. Because if you don't get them all at once, what happens? Guy gets in with one of them, escalates privileges, and you can't get the cancer out of your network. Very frustrating. And it normally happens at e-commerce sites where it's going to be known, because I always recommend, if you have to do a password change, pop off the network, immediately just start doing the password change. Hopefully you have Active Directory or some password management schema so you can just make the change quickly. But very few people get that right. And then the third way is backdoors. Well, that's really a pain, because that requires host diagnostic tests or network monitoring, and to be honest, you're going to do better off with host diagnostic tests, where you go to each machine and respond accordingly. And with today's tools, that's becoming less and less effective, as the tools are kernel-level tools hiding what they do. The last time we responded to an attack was about 3 weeks ago, and just to describe the attack, it was an OpenSSL vulnerability. So how to use network monitoring. It's an encrypted attack. It breaks OpenSSL. The guy gets root, runs a tool that we've never seen before. It's not publicly available. It's a kernel-level tool. And then it binds to a current running port for its backdoor, and it's encrypted. So network monitoring wouldn't help us. We had to do host-based diagnostic tests, go through the whole machine, looking at the current running processes, the file system, open ports when it's live, and what's actually listening on those ports. Kind of a difficult thing. I got some books to give away. By the way, it's 5:41. It's time. Where's Jim? Jim, if there's anybody still awake, well, we got, I actually have 2 books I'm going to give away. I got a couple of copies of this incident response book. It burns nicely for 7 minutes, should your heat go out in the winter. And then Richard Baitlick, I used to work with, wrote a book called The Dial Network Security, which is fantastic. So let's give away a copy of this. The question I'm going to have is, you're just going to give them away? Good, and I'll ask questions at the end for the other 2. So just look chipper, give good, positive, non-verbal communication about this presentation, and Jim will give you a book. But the emerging trends that I see, I definitely see a focus on pre-incident response in the government as well as in the financial services. There's a lot of people developing IR programs, and if there's something that you can take out of this presentation, I'm going to go through very quickly the idea of IR dry runs, or incident response, if you already have a plan in place, how to just test it very quickly, because those operational tests are great. Focus on end user education. Every single firm has some information security day. You know, you see the posters up and everybody comes together for an all-hands meeting or something. Or even if you have an intranet where you can communicate this. I've seen a change recently. The attacks aren't vulnerable services as much as it's an end user being the problem and the entryway into your network. So you have no choice, really. If you want to keep cancer out of the network, the end users are going to have to be part of the folks doing that. Use of enterprise forensic tools, no question about it. We have network capability. Don't you think we could actually start using it when we do live data capture and when we do forensic duplications? And when we do forensic duplications, can't we just reach out across the network, automatically hash the drive, and just get the 17 programs executing that aren't in our hash sets? The fact that we're still grabbing 4 terabytes of data when less than 2 gig is all that's necessary is going to have to change. And then concerns with compliance. There's compliance coming out, the wazoo right now with regulation standards, industry best practices, as they call it. There are firms that build what I call compliance matrices, and they say, here's the 5 standards and regulations and legislature that we need to adhere to. And then they have 109 rows, and then you just go across, here's where we're at, and here's where we need to go, and they have these roadmaps developed. In fact, I think they handed out a free book right at this conference all about this kind of stuff. That NSA information assurance methodology is the same darn thing, but it was for mostly the government. Everybody's starting to do it. So creation of an IR program, real quickly, I'm just going to talk off the top of my head. This is something you can do at your firm, and it's fantastic. If you get high-level buy-in that this is something that's necessary to protect your key assets, the easiest thing to do is just start writing that IR program development. Step 1, who needs to be involved? Actually, step 1 is what I call assessment. What do you already have in place? You collect your documents, your information security document, your data retention policies. You have to define what incident response is even going to be at your firm. Then you have to interview the key employees to determine what's your undocumented policy, and you're going to see that's going to be totally different than whatever's on paper, because most of the people that do incident response probably have never read their information security policy at their firm. That's fine if it works. But once you do that assessment phase to see what you've got, the second thing is make sure that folks can actually implement it, and that requires maybe on-the-job training of some folks. In other words, live response toolkits or whatever technology you've bought, make sure they know how to use it. Even if it's just get the data quick and call a number to get the right folks involved, that's very key. I'm going to emphasize dry runs because it is cheap, it is simple, and let's face it, IT guys actually enjoy this. And one of the ways you can do it is you can simulate a lot of things, or you can sort of make it real. It all depends. I don't recommend putting something on your real operational network that's vulnerable or anything like that. But going through the drill makes people stronger and better, and it really helps you outline what are the real roles and responsibilities that take place when something bad happens. Because it's amazing, there's 2 or 3 people that every time something bad happens, even though they're not even in the IR plan, magically become the guys that everybody goes to solve problems quickly and get the countermeasures implemented. And it's just great training, and it's free. If you have the time frame to do it, I'd recommend doing IR dry runs, and if I had the rack and stack where people should spend their budget, long before I'd have a honeynet, I'd make sure people could respond to actual things, and then worry about responding to, maybe that's a good way to do it, though, is with the honeynet. But I just, big fan of dry runs, cheap, fun, everybody likes them. And then make sure that I call the IR program rollout phase, make sure everybody knows you have an IR program, so that they know to communicate to you, hey, we've detected a possible incident. General trend in this, when you create an incident response program, or if you created one 3 years ago and it's time to revamp the enthusiasm about it, and you have to get out there and talk to everybody and update it, and take it off the shelf, dust it off, is you have to tell everybody about things, get them all pumped up about it. It's a 3-year cycle. I mean, every 3 years you're going to have to tell your IR team, hey, first off, that time it's new people as people move around. You got to get them all back in the room again and start over. Emerging trends, faster data collection, and everybody's starting to do this kind of stuff. DDs across the network, using enterprise forensic tools to get just the live data or duplicate the whole media, and what I'm going to see is forensic acquisition of the files that matter. I think what needs to happen is the ability to sit at a central terminal and click, I want the live data from this selected IP range, and I want the directory listing, all the time date stamps. Hit go, goes out to whatever pre-deployed server you have, comes back with that information, and you go through saying, these are the 15 files that aren't in my baseline. Notice that the keyword there is baseline, not part of my known good build, and then just go out and grab those files and analyze them. I don't think we need to duplicate an 80 gig drive because there's one rogue process on it. We might, and we need to be careful, but the amount of resources that go into it right now are exceptional. We're going to see pre-deployed mechanisms to assist in data gathering. I'm convinced of that. Definitely faster data analysis as well. It's getting faster and faster with the tools that everybody uses, like people use Forensic Toolkit by Access Data, a lot of fantastic scripts and built-in capability in that. People using Case with all their end scripts. And all those things do is help you drill down quicker to get to the data that you need. With the known environments, that's actually a key thing. Most of these forensic tools get you to do stuff you should have done a long time ago. If you read a security book in 1985, it would say, create a known good build, roll it out. Same thing here. If you have good builds on all your internet-facing systems and you just know what should be running, you MD5 some of those processes, you MD5 some of the whole image, it'd be real nice to just reach out and grab everything outside of that boundary and look at it when you need to do duplications of machines. What I mean by collaborative environments, and we just started doing this, when I respond, I'll have 4 or 5 guys if it's a real, if it's something that's, what I call the red ball case, we really need to get in there and fix it. And we actually work in an environment where we're networked, we're encrypted, but we can immediately all access the data that we're grabbing. And the reason that's important is I almost look at a computer as if it's a crime scene. You need a fingerprint guy, you need a DNA guy, you need a blood splatter guy, you need all these experts in regular crime.